Welcome back to Switchcast. Tonight we are actually not live. We're launching Season 2 of Switchcast on the road. I wanted to get some really interesting guests on the show for you guys, and it's a little bit difficult to convince people to come to Cleveland. Even in the summer, it's not the greatest place in the world, but whatever. We're here, and we love it for what it is. That being said, we took a trip to New England this past weekend and visited some incredible collections, museums, and car shows, including the Audrain Automotive Museum to see the Supercar collection. We visited Autostrada, and man, it was a great time when we saw some incredible cars. But one of the interviews we conducted was with James Repasi of Repasi Motorwerks. If you know anything about Porsches, you probably will have heard his name. He is the go-to guy for Carrera GT service. Now, if Carrera GT doesn't mean anything to you, that is Porsche's famous supercar that they built in 2004 and 5 with a V10 engine mid-mounted, a carbon monocoque chassis that was essentially developed from a Formula One project. So it is as close as you can get to a race car for the streets. It is Porsche's probably their best supercar they've ever made. Some people may fight me on that as saying the 959 is better or more significant or whatever, but I think the Carrera GT is my favorite Porsche ever. Anyway, being that they are complicated engineering projects, they are pretty difficult to work on, and you need somebody that knows what they're doing, not just your average Porsche mechanic. They need special training and special tools. James Repasi has been working on those cars for the better part of the past decade, and he has established himself as probably the world's foremost expert on those vehicles. When we went into his facility, he had no less than, I think, 10 Carrera GTs in his shop. So I was very excited not only to see his shop, but to find out about how he got to where he is and what he's doing. So tune in. Sorry you can't call in and ask your questions, but I think there will be plenty of knowledge, and I hope my own questions for Jimmy will suffice for you guys tonight. Enjoy the show. So this is really just a conversation like we've been having the whole time. All the podcasts are pretty low-key. The good thing is it's not live, so if you say anything really stupid, we can cut it out. But I'm going to go like it's live. We're just having a conversation, and we're just going to go into it. So, all right, so you've got this really, really impressive shop. First of all, thank you for sitting down with me, for opening up the shop to us and letting us check it out. I know for you, it's just work, and you come in every day and you look at a Carrera GT and you see what needs to be done. But for us, this is eye candy. This is really special. But give me a little bit of your background with cars. Are you a car guy? How did you grow up around cars? How did you kind of get to where you were wanting to start your own shop?
I think it's a pretty common story. Started off as a hobby when I was in high school. Admittedly, I was not into German cars at all when I first started, turning wrenches and I was more enthusiastic about
the last name like Repasi. I'm really surprised you weren't into German cars.
No, that's right. I mean, and again, I think it was I was focused on what was attainable. You know, of course, everybody would. Growing up, I had the Ferrari posters, the Lamborghini posters, maybe even some Porsches. I probably didn't know the difference between the three brands, growing up as a kid, because they were just so unattainable. So my background started just wrenching in the garage on, tuner cars. And
What age did you start doing that?
I'd say maybe my last year of high school.
Okay. All right. Were your parents into cars, or you just...
No, not at all. Just the group of guys that I was hanging out with at the time.
Okay. All right. So if you weren't into the supercars as a kid, what was like a dream car for you? When you were 15, what was your dream car?
A lot of Japanese cars.
Okay.
Whether it be Nissan R33, R34, Supra. But yeah, definitely the Japanese cars.
Okay. All right. What's the first car you owned?
First car was a Ford Focus ZX2.
Wow.
Which
You're young. How old are you?
I'm 30. I'm 34.
Okay. I feel like they didn't even come out with the Focus until like the mid 2000s. So.
Oh, I'm sorry. Did I say Focus? The Ford Escort ZX2.
Oh,
Yeah, it
I was
was.
like, man, that math doesn't work.
Yeah, it was their sport version of the Escort.
Yeah,
I think it was like a 2002.
Sport in quotes there.
Yeah, and I was very unappreciative at the time because my parents gave it to me. It was the first car they provided me, and it was a 2002, had like 30,000 miles, and essentially a new car. But because it wasn't cool, and
those were definitely
definitely not cool. Definitely wasn't going to impress any girls with it.
They're still not cool.
Yeah, it was an automatic. Didn't treat it very well.
Oh no.
Yeah, it didn't last very long.
All right, what was the first cool car you owned?
I went through a lot of Integras right after that. That was kind of my entry into, my enthusiasm for cars.
When you say went through a lot of them, did you blow them up or wreck them, or you just had ADD?
A combination of all three of those things. Blew them up, did engine swaps, wrecked them, sold them. So I had like 2 or 3 second generations, and then finally got my third generation last year, 2001, and fortunately for me, it happened right at the time where I was starting to mature a little bit. My driving style was calming down, and I was able to hold on to that one, and I still have it today.
No more front-wheel drive street races in the middle of the night?
Yeah, some one-wheel burnouts,
Yes.
that's right, or reckless driving on the highway with your friends. And so I heavily modified that and hung on to that all through high school, all through trade school, and
Where did you grow up?
In Connecticut.
Okay. All right. Cool. Good roads around here. Fellow New Englander. I grew up in Maine.
Oh, yeah. They're great.
Being a Maine snob, though, we looked at Connecticut people as basically like the annex of New York. So you've probably seen the memes of the map of New England, and Connecticut's like X'd out.
Yeah.
All right. So growing up, you're working on tuner cars. You started wrenching on your buddy's tuner cars in your garage. Your parents' garage, or you had your own garage?
It was definitely my parents' garage or my friend's garage.
How did your parents take that?
I don't think they mind. It was. I think they were just happy that I wasn't out and causing trouble, or they're concerned about what I was doing. And I was either home working on the car all night, or I was out driving the car all night. So out of the two, they would rather have me home wrenching on the car.
Sure.
Not to say it didn't
get arrested for that.
Yeah,
for
not
that.
to say it didn't. It didn't inconvenience them at times. One instance in particular, when I was converting my Integra to right-hand drive, I needed to. Well, like we spoke about earlier, back in, this is probably 2008 at the time, you couldn't import them yet.
Right.
Now you would just import one. It's actually less expensive, let alone far less work. But during that conversion, we didn't have a 220 outlet for the welder in the garage, and without even thinking that it was going to be an inconvenience, went to Home Depot, mocked up my own 220 extension cord, went to my mom's kitchen, moved her oven out of the in between the cabinets where the oven lived, and plugged in my extension cord. So hours later, I'm in the garage welding my car back together, because it's essentially in 2 pieces at this point, with the bulkhead missing. The whole front is hanging off, the frame rails. And she just comes walking into the garage because she follows this extension cord into the garage, and I'm in there with a welding mask, welding my car back together.
No cookies for you.
Yeah, no, not at all. So her inconvenience became my inconvenience, because she needed to make dinner for all, for the family. And so she had to unplug my welder, and she was understanding enough to just finish cooking dinner with the oven kind of on the side. So when she was done, I could plug it back in and finish my conversion.
Sounds like you had some great parents.
Yeah, they were very supportive, despite everything I put them through.
Switchcast on the Road is brought to you by Celebrity Machines. Celebrity Machines offers more than 250 different screen-accurate license plates from movies and TV shows like Breaking Bad, Back to the Future, Ghostbusters, The Office, and so many more. Celebrity Machines also makes our dealer insert plates and our commemorative 2539 plates from the fastest cannonball run ever. Even though they're sponsoring Switchcast on the road, we do not recommend using fake or display plates while you're driving. You should use actual real plates. But these will look great on your wall or maybe on the front of your car, and they make great gifts as well. Check out CelebrityMachines.com and use discount code SWITCHCAST to save a massive 25.39% at checkout. Again, that's CelebrityMachines.com, discount code SWITCHCAST. All right, so from stealing your mom's 220 line to weld up your Integra parts to being the Carrera GT guru of the world, fill in the gap there. How did you get from there to here?
After high school, I went to a trade school, UTI. It's the one that you would see the commercials late at night. They had like the Hot Rod U.
They have the white Ford GT with the blue stripes in the commercial.
Right.
Like you're going to get to work on that.
Exactly.
No.
And so there was one right in Massachusetts. Went there for 2 years, did their core program and some extra diagnostic courses. And their selling point is their MSAT programs, which is manufacturer specific advanced training. Mm-hmm. That meaning, depending on your performance, you could apply to go to further your education with a brand specifically. And at the time, Porsche was the premier manufacturer. There was Mercedes, BMW, there was countless others. But the goal was if you performed well enough to apply, because all other manufacturers would automatically take you if you went through the first interview, if you got past the first interview for Porsche. At the time, they were taking 12 students a year. So it was extremely competitive. They had campuses all over the country. And so that's kind of why. You could only apply if you were, in the top 3% of the class. And then it really became, luck of the draw. Applied for Porsche, got past my first interview, and fortunately the second interview as well. Funny story about that was I was nervous, showed up in a suit, tie, like it was a job interview, and a couple minutes into my my interview, we started talking about this Integra again, and I'm flipping through pages because the whole interview process at this point was explaining why you were different. They didn't really care so much about your grades and performance because you wouldn't be there if you didn't perform well. And so I started flipping through and describing how passionate I was working on cars and attention to detail. And he just couldn't believe it. He saw the car in my mother's garage in pieces, no firewall, then it coming back together, and he just stops the slideshow and he looks at me. He's like, does this car run? Like he just wanted to see where it was going because he couldn't believe there was nothing left, no glass, no anything.
Well, because so many people get to that point,
right,
and then
anybody can
in
take
the
a car
garage
apart
forever.
Right,
every boomer in the world has their '66 Chevelle in that state in their garage, and it's been there for 30 years. Okay, so he asks if it runs.
Yeah, and I said, yeah, I said absolutely, it's right outside, and he just. In astonishment by that answer, he said, I have to see this. He's like, I just have to. So we got up, we went outside, and as we walk out of the interview, there's 3 or 4 other candidates waiting to interview, and they see me in there for all of 4 minutes, come out with the guy interviewing us, and got out there, and we went for a ride. And during the interview, he just looks at me. He's like, I've never done this before. He's like, but unofficially, he's like, welcome to Porsche. And so, felt very grateful for him and went to that program. At the time, they only had one facility in Atlanta, Georgia, for this type of training, and I was there for a year. Applying everything I've learned at the trade school and the extra diagnostics that I took to Porsche specifically.
Okay, is that where the Porsche Experience Center is now? Is that same facility?
It currently is. It wasn't originally there. It was in Atlanta. It was in a not such a great area of Atlanta, College Park. A lot of rappers grew up there. But yeah, so now it would be the Experience Center, which they also have factory training.
Yep.
And this.
Yeah, my buddy Kellen Miller works down there. He's one of the 3 technicians there. So.
Yeah, so they have like a little area in that building now.
Yep. Okay. Cool. All right, so you worked for Porsche for a while. Did you work at a dealership? Did you work for the factory? Where, what got you here? So
I graduated from that PTAP program, that apprenticeship program. Came back home, was out of cash. We had to pay for our own living down there. That was the only expenses we had to take care of. Porsche covered everything else. Came back, applied at the local dealers in the area in Connecticut, and was very fortunate enough to get into my top pick. It's a dealer right down the street here, Porsche of Fairfield.
Okay.
At the time, they were like
back when I was flipping Porsches. I think I got their first or second 997 GT3.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
It's a great facility. At the time, I think they were like premier dealer 8 years in a row, which is pretty. It wasn't very common at the time. Only 50 dealers in the country get it, and to have a running record like that, it was pretty impressive. I worked there until last June.
Last June. Okay, so you've had this place a year. I can't do math. A year, basically, right?
Yeah.
Holy cow. All right, so, man, that begs even so many questions. What inside of you said, okay, I'm done with working at a dealer. I'm going to go open my own shop and work on the most exclusive car Porsche's ever made?
Again, I just feel very fortunate for the opportunities that have been presented to me. While I was at the dealer, it wasn't long until management just realized I was a young, enthusiastic technician. I was still living at home with my parents at the time. I started working there when I was 21.
But your mom had exclusive access to the 220 line now, right?
Right, exactly.
So you had dinner on time every night.
That's true. I got a stern talking to after that. Anytime I move the oven now, I've got to give her a 7 days notice. But yeah, so I always put learning and really just my passion before the money. And it started way back then, because for me, I'd rather, make half as much money either learning to diagnose a vehicle, learning to disassemble engines, the hard work that doesn't necessarily, you don't necessarily get compensated for as much as other work. The way the flat rate system and the dealers pay, it's much easier to turn hours when you're doing basic service work.
Right.
Every job has a set hourly rate, and that doesn't change whether it takes you longer or shorter amount of time. And so the idea is you just keep beating the time,
right,
and then going to the next job.
So it sounds like, really quickly, and then I'll let you finish, it sounds like you were essentially working for retirement, whereas everybody else was working for the weekend. The average tech. I mean, that's not to generalize, but that's how you were setting yourself out. You had a vision of something you wanted to accomplish and something you wanted to be, and you made decisions accordingly.
Looking back on it, I agree. But in fairness, I was just a young kid that enjoyed.
You didn't know that was
I just enjoyed taking things apart. Okay. I wanted to learn. I'd rather do these difficult jobs or labor intensive jobs, like I said, and lose money essentially, not making it.
You can't bill for all the hours you're working on it. Yeah.
Rather do that than do 4 brake jobs in a day. Because that's how you make the money at a dealer. Right. 4 brake, or service work. Right. You just keep turning that stuff over. Right. And for me,
but you're not learning.
You're not learning. It's redundant. Don't get me wrong. It's a key part of the learning process. So the first few years there was a lot of that, but then it gets stagnant. You don't really learn anything if you're only taking wheels off to do tires or wheels off to do brakes. You're inspecting the suspension. You may eventually get some warranty work if you find oil leaks and stuff. But again, unless you put yourself in the position to learn and to grow, it's very easy to just get caught up in that cycle. And like you said, chase that weekly paycheck and forget why you're doing what you're doing. You know, once you start focusing on the numbers rather than the cars and the client, for me, it just lost all of its joy. Sure. And so, like I said, I mean, I didn't realize it at the time, but the management noticed, and when there was an opportunity to work on my first Carrera GT, it was only because the older technicians that were originally trained to work on them no longer wanted to. You know, they were, getting closer to retirement. They just wanted some of the easy work. And I mean, it's pretty intimidating taking these cars apart. Sure. And again, though it's at the dealer, most of this stuff is service work on these cars. You don't do it enough to get, efficient enough to make your money. Right. So doing a service on this could take 2 days, and it may pay, half a day or 3/4 of a day worth of pay. And so once the senior guys kind of turned their head, they needed somebody to work on the cars, and I was given a few opportunities, and so like I said,
I know a lot of stuff goes on at service departments, but that's definitely not what the guy owning a Carrera GT wants to hear. Like, I took it to the Porsche dealer because they're the Porsche dealer. None of the experienced guys wanted to work on it, so they went with the young guy.
Yeah, and it's not what you want to hear, but unfortunately, that's the reality. Yeah, and that gap has only gotten larger over the years, and again, hindsight, it's easy for me to look back and see, but as I started working on them and doing more of the bigger jobs and getting more cars sent from outside of our normal service area because of the word of mouth, communication with these owners.
It's actually funny you say that, because I now, you're jogging my memory, and I do remember, before I had heard about Repasi, and credit to Dave Benson. Do you know him from Chicago? Yeah. He was the one who introduced me to you. I had heard, in addition to a couple places in Atlanta, that Porsche Fairfield was like the place to send your Carrera GT. Right. So, yep.
Yeah, and I didn't realize it at the time, but it's because I was filling this gap of senior guys, because if we just break it down to the numbers, we're talking at 2010, 2009, or 2011 was really when I started working on these cars. The cars came out in 2004 or 5, so technicians were sent in 2003, and in 2003 you sent your elite guy. He's usually older in age. He has been in the industry for a while, and 10 years later, he's either moved on. Yeah, he's either moved on to an independent because he can't keep up with the grind of a dealer, or he's still there, but he just wants to get through the day. He just wants to do the easier jobs, so like I said, I mean, I didn't realize it at the time, but that's why I was getting so many calls and so many cars from outside of the area. It's just the community realized that there was somebody that was fulfilling a need, and it became, before I knew it, it was just like a snowball effect. It went from me doing 1 or 2 a year to 3 or 4, and then there was always 1 car at the dealer, then it was always 2, then it was always 3, and it happened so quick I didn't even realize it. And furthermore, on this gap point I'm trying to make, the regional rep, which was coming around, and he would love to come in, and he would go straight to I had a little corner at the dealer, and he'd just love to come in and ask where the cars were from, because he's familiar with the cars. He's been around them for years, but he got his enjoyment just to see how far they were coming from. Yeah. And I think I had done like 30 engine out services, which is that big major service that these cars are known for needing. Sure. And he made a little joke about, hey, you could probably teach the training course. And I was just like, I kind of just laughed it off, and I was like, yeah, I haven't even taken it. And he stopped in his tracks because he couldn't believe it. And the issue is because the cars had dropped in value, customers weren't doing in-depth services, and they didn't realize that the cars were going to start coming back for these bigger services. They hadn't provided the training in 10 years. And so he immediately left, got on the phone, made these phone calls, made, Porsche North America aware of this need. And it wasn't just, it really had nothing to do with me, but he knew if it happened here in Fairfield at my dealer, it was happening all over the country.
Right.
Meaning these young apprentices or young enthusiastic technicians were getting these cars rather than the techs that were trained on them because they had moved on. Mm-hmm. And yeah, so they had started the course back up, and I think I had, like I said, probably about 40 engines out before taking the class. And all the class is, it's a 5-day.
Yawn and sleep through the class.
I learned a lot. I mean, there was some technical stuff
Mm-hmm.
that I got to learn, rather than just the hands-on portion. But the class in itself is just a 5-day course, and you literally pull the engine out, you look at it, and put it back in. I mean, there is a lot of unique procedures in
Mm-hmm.
doing that, but that's only a fifth of what goes into servicing these cars. I mean, you don't even take a valve cover off, to do the valve adjustment, which is the actual reason why you take the engine out for the major service in class. So they don't even know what the underneath the valve cover looks like.
Wow. Well, we have a new sponsor for Switchcast Season 2, and that is Nathan's Detailing, located in Cleveland, Ohio. Part of the reason they're sponsoring us is because our producer, Ethan, is also their marketing manager. And in order to take some time to go on the road and bring Ethan with us, he needed a fair amount of time off. So Nathan's is proud to let him come with us for these adventures. And Ethan's becoming a car guy in the meantime. And we're very thankful to them for their sponsorship. Nathan's is a full-service automotive detail facility. They work for dealers, for private individuals. They even do mobile detailing. They do PPF, paint correction, ceramic coating, the whole works. So if you're looking to have your car fully detailed after a road trip like one we just took, take it over to Nathan's Detailing. You can find them on Instagram, on Twitter, on TikTok, on every social media platform. Again, thanks to Ethan, our producer and their marketing manager. So check out Nathan's Detailing if you want your car to be clean and fresh. That gives me an idea of the background and obviously the connection. So at what point did you say, or what inside of you said, I want to start my own shop?
It was really just, so once I built the clientele and really found my niche of what I enjoyed doing day to day, it got to the point where, working inside the confinements of a dealer, I just wasn't able to provide the service experience that I'd want. And what I mean by that is working with the clients on the financials, just because components are extremely expensive and just the whole process can be, streamlining the transport logistics and documentation, having the clients come in and visit. Every part of it had its own restrictions and difficulties and hurdles. And it for me, it got to a point where I just felt like it was holding back the overall product could be. Mm-hmm. Because
the overall customer experience.
Yeah. I mean, because let's be honest, nobody's enthusiastic about bringing their car in for service work.
Right.
If it's broken or if it needs, if you're modifying it, or there's some sort of
money to get it back to where it was before.
Right. Right. Yeah. And so, what I enjoyed doing is documenting it, talking to the client, providing an education of what goes into the service and what each part, what they gain from it. And it was just difficult through the dealer. Sure. Mainly just because it was getting so expensive working with their labor rates, their parts markup, and then in addition to that, having to spend so much time on my own, not turning a wrench, communicating with the clients, talking about this stuff,
and then you're not getting paid for that,
and myself not getting compensated for it.
Right.
And so it really became, it got to the point where I knew it could be mutually beneficial, and that's when everything just clicked. As soon as I realized that not only would I be helping myself, which wasn't a priority, but it got to the point where I could provide a better service experience for the client. It just made all the more sense.
Sure. Okay. Is the dealer ticked that you left and took all their business, or did you leave with their blessing?
No, they were really excited. I mean, they knew I've been there 13 years, and it really got to the point where I do all my own scheduling. I do all the logistics for transport. I'd even do most of the service writer's job. It really just, the only reason I would lean on them was for just paperwork signing and authorizations, the legality issue.
So you were running everything.
Yeah, I was essentially running a little business in those two little bays. And so they kind of already, they kind of saw it coming. But
and they were probably, again, going back to what you said about, like, it's hard to bill properly. You can't make money doing flat rate on Carrera GTs.
Right.
So they're looking at it. It's not like you took their oil change business away. That was a huge profit center for them. It probably was not a big money maker for them as much as it was a good, like, anchor.
Right.
And it probably got clients in the door,
And that's exactly right.
They didn't burn their service shop down. They're still booking 3 weeks out, I'm sure. And,
exactly.
Billing flat rate and
So
cranking them out.
they were always very supportive of me. They always knew the time would come. We had multiple conversations years before the actual decision came up in how to transition, to make it work for both parties. And then, of course, that end. So I appreciate all the support they've always given me. But more importantly, like you said, me being in there, having 2 bays, which at that point, the dealer had grown in size so much that not many of the technicians had 2 bays. It wasn't cost effective. So to have 2 bays tied up with Carrera GT work, and me being the least efficient technician in the shop, it just didn't make sense.
Right.
You've got to think about the dollars and cents of it. How many high-end services and brake jobs could they do in that same bay over the course of a 4 to 6 week period that it took me to do one service?
Yeah.
So, sure,
and
the invoices,
liabilities
higher
too.
Right. The
Anything
insurance
goes
rates.
wrong,
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's exactly right. So, the big invoice at the end of the month or 6 weeks, sure, it was impressive, but if you broke that down, I mean, even if you just broke down the hourly rate, it sounds like a lot of hours, but when you know what goes into it, these services could be anywhere from 80, 100 to 120 hours, which it's kind of shocking. And then you hear 4 to 6 weeks worth of work. That's 120 hours is essentially 3 40-hour work weeks. So I'm actually 50% efficient if I get it done in 6 weeks.
Right.
The only
and that's not making that's
right.
That's break even basically.
Exactly. Yeah. And the only reason I wasn't fired after doing my first service was because of the markup that came with the parts. That was the only thing that saved it.
Right.
And
I'm sure their sales department benefited too, because when you have those types of clients coming in,
right,
it benefits the whole business. Okay.
Yeah. So now they have, just one last point on that. Now they have all the parts sales, because I buy all my parts for them, without having any of the liability and me taking up the room.
Right.
So it's mutually beneficial also for me and the dealer now, me being down the street.
Gotcha.
I cover all the overhead, and they just get the
awesome
the parts sales.
All right. This is the joy of not live. Yeah. Commercial break. All right, we're back with Jimmy Repasi, no longer with a bug on his shoulder. Magic of editing. Okay, so you open your own shop. Hear me out on this question, because don't take it as a it's not a leading question or anything, so whatever, I'm just going to ask it. All right, so when I look at a lot of service shops, I kind of use the analogy or the comparison that technicians are like chefs. They're all really talented, and they all think because they're really talented, they should start their own business. But most of them are terrible at business. And that's why, I mean, obviously why so many restaurants go under, but you look at like these savant technicians that go into business, and it's like, now you really should have just like gotten somebody to run the business and then kept working on cars, because that is your strength. So I guess the question is, did you have some sort of mentor or somebody on the business side of things that prepared you? Because obviously you had been working on cars and getting really, really good at working on cars. And you know, you told me you had more of a understanding of the scope of the entire process. You had been running logistics, you had been doing billing, you had been communicating with the clients, so you had the foundation. But there's a whole nother aspect of just, you know, running a shop, hiring techs, doing the taxes, the business, all sorts of things that people are not always, I guess, cut out for. And before you answer that, I'll just say, like, seeing your shop and the attention to detail on the incredible, just little things, I already know the answer to that. Like, you're somebody that every T has to be dotted and every I crossed. I said that wrong. I'm dyslexic, but whatever. The word meticulous is overused, but you are meticulous. And I know you have to be to work on these cars, but I think that personality of you being a learner and you just being meticulous probably suited you far better for running your own business than most of these guys. But I want you to speak to that in terms of how you made that transition well, and if you had people in your corner to help you with that.
Yeah, and I appreciate that, and I think I agree on all points. Fortunately for me, I did have that transitionary period of the last 8 or 9 years at the dealer, 5 years specifically, working with the clients directly, with the billing, with the transport logistics. So I definitely had a learning experience with that, and I always had people at the dealer, whether it be working the numbers for me, and then I just make the calls and just working that part of the business. The service advisor portion, communicating with the customers about cost of cost of services and all of that. So I had a lot of practice with that, and fortunately, the workshop here is it's low volume, bespoke service, boutique style.
Mm-hmm.
If I have 1 or 2 cars leave a week, that's a lot, and 1 Carrera GT a month. So as far as that paperwork goes, it's not a whole lot.
So you have a year's worth of work sitting here.
Yeah, most times,
okay,
without a doubt.
Yep.
And but to go further, like you said, with the state paperwork and taxes and the government and paperwork, it's like anything else. I found early on at the dealer, well before I touched a Carrera GT, that to make sure you're not only efficient but thorough, you've got to have processes. Mm-hmm. And that's any to simplify it into servicing a vehicle, wise, it's you pull the car into the to the work bay, you review the paperwork and what you're going to be doing on the car, you perform your safety check, and all of that is the same whether it's a Carrera GT or a 911 or a Boxster, and then you kind of start wide, and then you focus and funnel in to, okay, now this client, it has these concerns, this car's here for this, and doing that, you cover all the bases. Mm-hmm. And I approached all that paperwork in the same way. Okay. The first time going through it, there was a lot of fumbling, a lot of doing things over, double checking, doing things incorrectly, finding out after paperwork has been submitted, but all of it is just keeping records of that, and now having procedures in place.
Mm-hmm.
A reminder on the calendar at the end of every month that I've got to pay my state taxes. Reminder on the calendar, every time quarterly reports are due. Things of that. And it's all about just setting up those processes and systems, and it kind of simplifies everything.
Gotcha.
I find people they get lost and almost cause more of the anxiety of those jobs just thinking about it than actually sitting down and going through it, because it may only take you 30 minutes to do that type of work, but if you put it off for weeks, you've put more time into putting it off and getting worried about it than just sitting down and getting it done.
Honestly, that's my weakness. I'm thankful to have a good team around me to help me with those things. I don't like paperwork, but you make it sound so simple. It isn't. You're dealing with the government.
I would love to have somebody on the payroll. I don't want there to be any miscommunication there. I don't want to make it sound like I enjoy doing it by any means. But again,
I had to learn it. I had to get good at it. I'm like, the local title bureau is like, man, you guys are great with titles, and like, I'm meticulous about that stuff because I don't want it to get rejected. Yeah. But I hate that I'm really, really good at title paperwork for the state of Ohio. Yeah. Like, I'm like, I don't need to know that, but it's something that I had to learn to get by until I could show somebody else and put them on.
I'm sure you've got a process, and you may not have even realized it was a process.
No,
but the way you approach it was, there was steps that you take.
Yeah.
And getting through it, and like I said, you don't realize it when you're doing it until you need to explain it, and then you realize you approached every title the same way, or every car the same way. Yeah. And you may not have even had known.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. So there's a saying, and sell to the masses and eat with the classes. Have you heard that? Sell to the masses, eat with the classes. Sell to the classes, eat with the masses. So it's basically a principle that if you're selling to the super wealthy, you will not become like them. You are, going to be on a lower level. But if you're selling to the general public, that is how you get wealthy. And I think the saying is probably more applicable to, somebody trying to get incredibly wealthy, right? Jeff Bezos and Elon Musk and all those guys, that they Michael Dell, Bill Gates, they didn't design crazy expensive things just for a few people. They're trying to sell to a lot of people. So, you're not trying to become a billionaire. So that saying may not apply, and obviously there are plenty of people, myself included, who have made fine livings servicing the wealthy. But I think the principle could still be the same, because you even brought it up, right? So like, servicing a Carrera GT is not as profitable. The specialized service is not as profitable as, like, if you put in a quick lube here, you'd be making, correct me if I'm wrong, a lot more money. And you would probably own your own Carrera GT a lot faster by having an oil service shop versus working on people's Carrera GT. And that's kind of like the example of that saying. So the question there is, I mean, obviously it's partly answered by seeing what you do. Your business is partly probably driven by passion, because if you're in it only for the profits, then you wouldn't be doing this. Is that correct?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the answer is that simple. It's not about just the bottom line. For me, it's just every day coming in, and whether it be refining the process in servicing the cars, or streamlining how I do it, or solving problems that don't exist to most. That's why I do it. It's working through the cars to make them as good as possible. And that's why I do it. It's, like, perfect example is servicing, just doing annual services, even on Carrera GTs. I mean, there's still a good amount of money in that rather than disassembling them for 4 to 6 weeks, ordering parts, having things sit. But for me, it's not about that. It's about working through the car thoroughly, systematically, making it better, or at least bringing it back to how it left the factory. Cars are 17 years old, and they've found their way into some interesting hands, whether it be owners or craftsmen. And so even the 2,000-mile cars come in, and they can need not only a lot of deferred maintenance work, but repairing things that may have been modified previously or not put together properly, and then also furthering it, because as amazing as the cars are, they do have inherent weak points. It's technology that was designed in the 90s, early 90s for the engine, late 90s for the chassis, and technology has come so far since then.
Yep.
And
that's right, because the engine was part of another project, right? That got not shelved, totally canned.
Yeah, two separate projects that were canned. It was originally for an F1 team, Footwork. It was a 3-liter V10, rev to like 1,400 RPM or 14,000 RPMs, with pneumatic valve train, and then it was shelved because the team left them just as they were finishing up the engine, and then it went to a Le Mans chassis, V10 5.5 liter, got rid of the pneumatic valve train, regular overhead cams, and again that was shelved. A lot of different discrepancies on why that second project was shelved, but the end result was the same, and then it became a street car.
Yeah.
And so the architecture goes all the way back to that first F1 engine, and so engine specifically has very few weak points. It's more other parts of the chassis, whether it be the suspension, the brakes, the clutch, and so it's working through all of those components, using, just applying today's technology to those problems. That back in the early 90s there was a compromise with the clutch. Talking about that specifically, the modulation of the clutch, how small it had to be and how light it had to be. It was revolutionary for its time. I think there's something like 92 patents that were submitted when Porsche went to sell the car to the public, because it was all new tech. And nowadays, the clutch is nothing dissimilar than you could buy for a street car. And so it's just going through and working through these components and coming up with fixes, whether it be because of just plain cost or just applying the technology that's available today.
Wow. Switchcast is proudly brought to you by Switchcars. Switchcars is the enthusiast dealership where we buy, sell, service, store, and consign only cars that we like ourselves. Check out our hand-picked inventory at switchcars.com. Our pick of the week, it's fitting with visiting the Carrera GT and other Porsche GT specialist, is a Porsche GT3, 2007 Porsche GT3 with about 12,000 miles, red with the typical black Alcantara and leather interior. We've sold this car, I think, 3 different times already, all to very good clients. And in keeping with the name Switchcars, they keep switching cars, and it keeps coming back to us. So it's a really excellent example. It has a lot of painted red trim on the inside, which some people love and some people love a little bit less, but I like it, and I think it's a nice departure from the Spartan interior of many GT3s. The car is 100% original, all original paint, all factory stock, completely up to date on service, recent tires, PPF. It is a really, really excellent example. You can check that one out again on switchcars.com. How much? Okay, so you mentioned the clutch, and for those of you that don't know, I guess if you don't know what a Carrera GT is, maybe we've lost you by this by this point. But Porsche Carrera GT is probably one of the most interesting cars that Porsche has ever made. obviously they've made a lot of race cars, but this is the only, I would say, other than the 959, this is probably their first supercar for the street. Obviously, the 918 Spider was built recently, but it was pretty much one of a kind. It was an analog V10 mid-engine supercar, a departure from the flat six rear-engine 911s. Its styling was incredible. It was a carbon monocoque chassis. It was, to way oversimplify it, it was a Formula One car for the road. Can I say that without looking like a Porsche noob?
I mean, a lot of the tech came from the Formula One.
Yeah. So again, that's an over. It's like saying a GT3 RS is a track car for the street. It's not. It's a street car for the track. But anyway, they were $450,000 when they first came out in 2004, which was so much money at the time that most of them actually didn't sell, and they had to discount them heavily. They're now anywhere from $1 million to $2.5 million, and there's 10 of these in the shop. They're very technical to work on, and that's why people send their cars to somebody like Repasi. So the clutch is one of the things that people talk about a lot, because it is a very small, lightweight clutch. The car revs very, very quickly, and it makes it a little bit difficult to drive until you really learn the friction point on the clutch and get your footwork to match your to match what you want it to do. But everybody says the clutch is impossible to use, that they're fragile. What is the real story on that? Is it just user error, or are these clutches really fragile and difficult?
I think, yeah. I mean, it definitely has a reputation, and usually it's the first topic that comes up with these cars. It's as soon as they hear the clutch about the car, it's the next topic is the clutch. I personally don't have any problem driving it or using the clutch like any other car.
I don't either, but
I think it's more of a throttle issue, to be honest, because the clutch itself, the car has a system built into the engine control unit that if you don't give any throttle input, it's an anti-stall. So if you don't put any throttle input at all, and you just let the clutch out slowly, it'll give the car enough revs to move forward without stalling, anti-stall. And so, but that could be very time consuming. And so what ends up happening, either clients don't know that system's in place, or they improperly use it, or they just try to not use it. I say improperly because I'll talk to clients often, and it's very hard not to give any throttle input. Sometimes you don't even realize it. Your foot's resting on the throttle pedal, and 2 or 3% is enough to shut the system down, because it's only designed to come into play with 0% throttle input. And so they'll just rest their foot there, and it shuts the system down, and they call me saying that the system doesn't work. I've gotten many cars sent here, and not once have I ever been able to confirm, because there was a lot of rumors about that too, that the cars were originally sold without it, and then they added it, and it was a software update.
You have a line item on your billing for user error.
Well, yeah, and so which none of that's true. The car was originally sold with it. It was in every car. Not once have I confirmed it wasn't installed on a car. It's usually just them resting their foot on the pedal. And then secondly, it's when they try to drive the car without the system, they're not able to control the throttle enough. And that's what I meant by it being a throttle issue, not a clutch issue.
Sure.
So
because it revs so freely.
Exactly. And
your timing has to be perfect.
Right. And the easiest way to explain it to people is like how a motorcycle revs up. You just give it a little throttle, and it's 4,000 or 5,000 RPMs, and the Carrera GT revs up just like that. And so they'll go to modulate the clutch and give it a little gas, and as soon as they see 4,000 or 5,000, their initial reactions to let off, and if you let off and you've already started to engage the clutch, it's just going to stall. And then it compounds when you're driving on the street. The light has already turned green. You tried to pull away. You stall the car. You're never moving it from that light now.
Right.
That you've stalled it and you've got to restart the car.
Right.
You've got traffic behind you.
Yep.
So you might as well just shut the car
like
off and get out.
your tee shot into the grass.
Exactly.
Unless you're a pro, your mind is screwed. So the rest of that hole is going to be bad. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah, I let a customer test drive one time, and it was like I knew he wasn't going to buy it because his ego was hurt because he kept stalling the car out, and because I was behind him in his SLS, we traded keys, and I was just like, dang it, and he made up all sorts of intelligent sounding reasons why he wasn't going to buy the car, and I'm like, it's because he couldn't drive it. But anyway, okay, so how these clutches tend to not last very long. Whenever anyone buys a car, they want a clutch measurement. That's like the first thing they ask. It's like asking for a DME report on a 911 GT3.
You can do that too on this.
Yep.
The DME.
Yep. But how long have you seen a clutch? Or I guess, one, how long in theory could a clutch last if somebody actually knows how to drive it? Or what's the longest life you've seen out of a clutch?
So from personal experience, this is all I'm going to speak on because I've heard we've all heard the stories, the car left the dealer and the flatbed driver smoked the clutch, putting it on the truck, and it had 20 miles. We've all heard those stories.
Sure.
And so from personal experience, there's a local client, and admittedly, he bought the car before I was working at the dealer, but per his service records, he replaced the clutch at 3,000 miles. Mm-hmm. And that's not that unheard of on a car like this. And so that people have kind of thought that, 3,000, 5,000, 8,000, if you're good, they kind of go by those numbers. But that same client replaced it at 3,000, and he has 22,000 now, and it's not even half worn.
Gotcha.
And so, obviously he learned to drive the car and within those 3,000 miles and went through the repair and continued driving it. And so that same second clutch has 19,000 miles on it with more than half life. And so, that's the one personal experience and the one client that I could speak on. I've seen other cars that are one owners. I don't necessarily have the records to confirm, but they're one-owner cars with 30,000 miles on the original clutch, and so it doesn't seem like it's that unheard of. But with those facts, I would assume that the clutches can be driven and last just as long as any other clutch for a car if driven properly.
Gotcha. Yeah, the egoist in me wants to own a Carrera GT long enough to prove that I can make a clutch last 25,000 miles. Okay, what is, people always ask about like Lamborghinis and Ferraris, and people not experienced would say like, oh, well, man, I couldn't own one of those. Oil change is $4,000. That's kind of the assumption of these types of supercars. And on a modern Lamborghini, that's ridiculous. But on these cars, I mean, you do have to take a significant portion of the car apart. So like you were explaining to me about how to get the battery out, right? You have to take all the under tray panels off, the brake caliper, like just to slide it out because it's behind the fender. You said it was a 6 or 8 hour job to remove the battery. So certainly some of those assumptions about how difficult these cars are to service are true. But like what would be an average service cost in this car? The big major service aside, if you're just driving the car a couple thousand miles a year, you bring it in for an annual service, like what's an oil change cost, and what is an oil change cost, and what would like the average bill on one of these be that's not a full engine out major?
Specifically, an annual service on the car is 6 hours labor. So depending on where you are in the country and what your region charges, it's, your hourly rate times 6. And then the components, it's like $200, $250 worth of, components,
So-
filters, gaskets, seals.
$1,200,
Yeah.
give or take.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, exactly.
Yep. So not exorbitant, and that's more than just an oil change.
Right. It's it's a full look over, and that includes removing those under panels we're talking about, and if it did need a battery, it's part of the pre-check if it's done. Checking the charging system, the starting system, and the battery. If it is deemed that the battery's getting old and needs to be replaced, there's a lot of overlap there. Like you said, all those under panels would be removed already to get to the battery, and so it's. I mean, if you stay on top of it and you do your annual services and you do the interim services, and you spread out the cost, it's not all that much. It's catching the car up on deferred maintenance from 17 years of non-use, which can get expensive.
Yeah, and that's another question I wanted to ask. People are scared of putting miles on exotic cars. Everybody wants to buy the low mileage Ferrari, and then some people are scared of buying low mileage cars because they haven't been serviced. So what do you see with these cars? Is a 40,000 mile car typically going to need less things when it comes to you versus a 1,000 mile car? Or what issues do you see with the non-mileage, the non-driven collector cars?
I mean, it's a machine, so as any machine, if it doesn't go used in a regular basis, things are going to fail. Whether it be seals, leaking gaskets, things of that nature, or just components of the machine deteriorating. And the reality of it is, even the higher mile cars, the 30,000 mile, 40,000 mile cars are kind of like outliers. So in Carrera GT world, higher mile cars are anywhere from 10 to 20.
10,000, yeah.
So let's say 15,000.
Right.
I mean, you break
That's
that
still
up
only
over
500 miles a year.
It's exactly.
Yeah.
500 to 1,000 a year. So the reality is you'll never consume any of the components at a higher rate than they're going to age out at. Meaning, and I don't recommend following the maintenance intervals for these cars, because it's the interims every 2, the majors every 4, and so to be pulling the engine out for a valve adjustment every 4 years is definitely over servicing the car, considering it could be a couple hundred miles in that 4 years. But the reality is you'll never consume anything on the car faster than it's going to age out, and that goes for tires, brakes, suspension. And so the fortunate thing for the guys who drive the cars, and the unfortunate thing for the guys who don't drive the cars, the cost of ownership is exactly the same.
Yeah.
It's just what you get back
Right.
from it. Whether you've enjoyed the car for 10,000 miles in 10 years, during your ownership, or if you've driven it 1,000 miles for those 10 years, when you go to get the service, the car that was driven more most likely has less deterioration, components, or leaks. But the reality of it is the services are due, and the engine should be out and gone through anyway.
Okay. What does a major service cost on these? I've heard numbers all over the board depending on who's doing it. So what do you charge for a full engine out major service with the valve adjustment?
Just the regular service, and that's including the components that are involved. It's not as much as any of the numbers you've probably heard.
Okay.
If I was to talk to a client and he said just the major service, nothing else, you're probably in the $18,000 range. But
yeah, because I hear 40 to 50 thrown about quite a bit. Like if it hasn't had a $50,000 service, that's not a Carrera GT you want to buy.
And I would probably agree, because like I said, that's just what's on the service and what's required to be done. That doesn't include any of the components that have been aging out, or
Sure.
All the additional items that I do when the engine's out. Because the reality is like we're talking about, all of the work to get the engine out is done. So at that point, it becomes it pays dividends to go through the car and do all of the common failure points whether that be an extra gasket or a seal or an alternator or a starter, because that we're talking minimal amount of labor because it's out on a stand, versus if I return the car and a year or two later a seal or a gasket starts to leak, now you've got to get, hopefully you don't have to pull the engine all the way back out, but you still have got to get the subframe down, the suspension off the car. And so it just becomes, one of those typical while you're in there jobs.
Mm-hmm.
But it's also, an investment.
Mm-hmm.
So when I do the comprehensive major service that I do, my goal is that the engine will never have to be removed, and there won't be any failures on it for 10 to 12 years. And that's the ultimate goal. And what's included in that is, like I said, every seal that I know that fails or leaks, and gaskets, so much more, and working on so many of these cars and doing it over the last 9 years, working on the Carrera GT, it allows me almost to predict the future on some of these items. I could look at a seal or other service centers, other craftsmen could have the engine out. They could do everything on it that's failed. Every gasket, every component. It's not magic to replace something that's leaking, but that same guy's going to put the car back together, and then that seal that I knew was going to fail because I've done it on 10 other cars, he could have done it for, say $100, $200 when the engine was out. But now that client has to go back to the dealer, the car's down again, and he's got to pay to get to that point again. And depending on what that component is, it could be a couple thousand, or the engine could have to come back out.
Wow. Yeah. Okay. Makes sense. People say this to me in a kind of joking way, like non-car people, but they always like talk about, the whole Paul Walker Carrera GT thing. And most of the time people bring it up, it's not in the best light, but it does bring up a very good point. Like the car that Paul Walker died in Roger Rodas, it was on very old / maybe original tires, and they weren't warmed up, and there's all sorts of other things, but one of the big factors of that was old tires, and that's obviously a problem on cars that don't get driven. How often do you see cars come in with either original or really, really old tires on them because they're collectible?
A lot less common
now.
And I think that's because that particular incident shed light on that point. And it's not just the Carrera GT. I mean, I've serviced low mile, 996s, 997 GT cars, and it's the same scenario. And a lot of it is just, like I mentioned about the service, it's just lack of knowledge. They may not be trying to, not spend the money. They just nobody's had brought that point up to them, because the average service center is just going to do what they see and then let the car out the door. Right. And depending on who works on the car, they may not notice. They may not even look at the date code. They may do their tread depth measurement that the safety check sheet asked for, and then move on with the rest of the service. So I think if there's one good thing that's come from it, it's that awareness of parts aging out, even if they're not wearing out. And tires are being the biggest factor, it being the only thing that touches the road. But even suspension components, the dampers, they're all original. They're all starting to leak and fail. Obviously engine components, but
yeah. Interesting. So since you've started your business, values on the Carrera GTs have just about doubled. How has that changed how people are driving them or how people are servicing them, or both? I know I've experienced with some of my clients, when their car goes up drastically in value, all of a sudden they either want to sell it or park it because they're scared to drive it. But then on the flip side, I see people spending a bunch of money on either good service that they should do, or like, oh, I'm going to throw $2,000 at a ceramic coat or whatever, because they look at it going, well, my car's now a quote unquote an investment, because it's going up in value. So they don't really think about spending the money as much, because they don't see it as spending money, but, well, I'm going to get this money back because it's going up in value. So with the Carrera GTs doubling in value in the last year, have you seen an impact either in the demographic of your customers? Because, there's a certain demographic of people that are priced out of Carrera GTs or have sold them now, and a different demographic of collectors buying them. Has that impacted your business, or how are you seeing that on your end? Or are you seeing any change, or is it just business as usual for you?
It has changed business and has changed the way clients approach the service. Mm-hmm. It's nowhere near how the selling, the market, buying and selling has drastically gone up. I do feel clients are much more confident and comfortable spending the money because they do see it as an investment. That's also, I think why so many of these cars are deferred maintenance cases, because for the longest time they were unappreciated,
Right.
Undervalued.
Nobody wants to spend $40,000 on a car that they're not sure they're going to get their money back out of.
Right,
Yeah.
exactly. And so, there has been a tick up on that. And like you said, a lot of clients are nervous to drive them because of the values. Rightfully so. I think some of my favorite clients were the guys that appreciated the car for what it was and picked them up in the threes, like your story was. So those guys are starting to get a little nervous because it's a car that they would have never been able to, to add to
Right.
their collection at
Right.
today's evaluations. And so, and some of those guys, those are the guys are probably more prone to doing the service work, because now it's like a no lose.
Right.
But the interesting thing for me is a big portion of my business is the pre-purchase inspections that I do. Mm-hmm. Them being such a specialty car, you've got to go through the cars and evaluate them before you purchase one or sell one, because the values can change. At least previously to this market, the values could change the value of the car 10-15%. If it needed $30,000 worth of service or $100,000.
Right.
When the
or
car
if
was
it had hidden damage.
Or if it had hidden damage.
The
exactly.
service deferred maintenance is easy because you just say, okay, well, it's a $50,000
Right.
question. But yeah, looking for hidden damage, that's more than a $50,000 question. That's a pass-fail issue.
Right, exactly. And so when the cars were worth, 6 or 7, I was doing an inspection a month, sometimes more than that. And what's interesting is now that the values have doubled or tripled for some of these cars, I probably do a third as many inspections. And I don't know if it's specifically because of the dollar amount to the dollar amount of the service and or damage to the value of the car has gotten so much smaller. That percentage is such a smaller percentage, or if it's because clients are purchasing the cars just as a placeholder of money, just specifically speculation.
Yeah.
And they don't, they're only gonna park it anyway and let it sit and potentially go up in value. But that's probably the biggest thing I've seen as far as service goes. I think a lot of the clients that I get the pleasure to speak with in service, they've made the decision before they've called me.
Yeah.
So I think the once that they call me, they know they're taking the step to service the car. So I can't really speculate how many how many more or how many less phone calls I get because of that.
Right. Yeah, I think you're right in terms of the speculation where people are buying for placeholders. It's the same thing that's happening with houses. People are waiving inspections because of all sorts of reasons, but I see it. So I am not to your level on a mechanic side, but I do run a page called GT Vault, and I've established myself as an expert with the 911 GT cars. And so people were hiring me for consulting. They were paying me to go inspect them because even though I'm not a mechanic, I could do a far better inspection on a GT3 than most Porsche technicians could. Which I find kind of funny, but that business is all but dried up because people have stopped asking those questions because they only see them as some sort of appreciating of investment, and which I think is silly. I feel like they should be asking the questions more because they're paying more money for them, and it's almost more risky. Like the downside is bigger now if you make a purchasing mistake, but instead people are going, they've stopped caring about it. It's just become about the money, which is really sad. But we're just about out of time. But I had two quick kind of final questions for you. One is, I mean, you have an incredibly high standard here, and you've learned, you've put yourself through an incredible education in terms of what you learned. How many techs do you have working for you, or is it just you? And how in the world do you find somebody to hire with your standard?
So I've got two guys with me,
Mm-hmm.
and specifically the two guys that were chosen was because of what I know they're capable of doing.
Mm-hmm.
One I worked with alongside with for a few years, and so I was familiar in that sense. And he's the guy I have that comes in. He does the more modern cars. And yeah, so I'm very comfortable with his standard of work and his standard of ethics. And so I was comfortable with that. And then the second guy, he does all of my older cars, the air-cooled stuff. He's owned his own business in the area that was renowned for air-cooled Porsches and Porsche
Mm-hmm.
race car stuff. He's been working on Porsches for 45 years. So fortunately, he passed the business along and sold it. And so he's retired and doesn't want to deal with the day-to-day stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And I have just the right
perfect pace for him.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I have just the right amount of cars for him, and I'm very clear with my expectations in regards to what he has. I shouldn't say have to, but what I would like him to do. And it's really just him coming in and telling me what he wants. And so, for example, I've got a old 993 engine out. He came in, he drove the car, he evaluated what needed to be done. We came up with a plan, and he asked me and my other technician to have the engine out on the stand for him, and he'll take it from here on out. So very excited about that. He's a really good guy, and like I said, specifically in the area, a lot of people know him, and they immediately recognize his name. So I feel fortunate that he's willing to come in, and he's as excited to come in as we are to have him. And so he comes in and he just does what he does.
Just does his thing.
And I'm going to try to squeeze as much knowledge and connections and people, and because every time he comes in, it's like second nature to him. Whether it be a contact that he has or a resource for parts, he just knows exactly where to go. Maybe me and my other guy could get to the same end result, but not as efficient and not as straightforward as he can. So it's a perfect we work in harmony. I do my Carrera GT stuff, and my other tech does all the other modern cars, and he comes in to do the old stuff. So it's a good team.
Nice. All right, final question. So you start out driving Integras. What do you drive now?
I daily drive a Macan Turbo.
Okay.
First year Macan Turbo.
Yep.
Love it. And I've got a 996 Turbo that I bought way back when the prices were much more reasonable, and it was like the entry level for a powerful 911.
Mm-hmm. Fantastic cars.
Almost half the price of a comparative 997.
Hey, it's got the same steering wheel and dash as a Carrera GT.
That's true. That's true.
Well, not the dash, but
but yeah, same cluster.
yeah, same cluster. That's what I meant. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I don't think I recognized that when I bought it, but for me, it was same engine architecture, transmission architecture, same chassis as a 997 turbo for half the price. And so that's what got me into that. I was doing a lot of drives and track weekends with clients, and I had to show up with something more respectable than my Subaru STI. as capable as the car was, it didn't get the respect I think it deserved.
Absolutely.
But yeah, those are my two Porsches.
Awesome. Well, Jimmy, thank you for making the time for us, and especially on a Saturday night. Really quickly, where is the best place for people to find out about you or get information on your company or follow along what you're doing here?
I've got all the regular networks. I've got Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. It's Repasi Motorwerks.
All right. With an E, right? German?
Yep, the German way. And they could feel free to reach out there. All my contact information's there if they'd like to schedule a service. And
awesome.
Yeah.
Great. Thank you for being on.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Thanks for coming.
Yeah. We hope you enjoyed tonight's show as much as I did. And if you have any suggestions for guests that you'd like to see us interview, we're willing to travel across the country. We love cars and we love road trips, especially at slightly above the speed limit. So send us a message, post your comment with who you would like to see on the show, and we'll do our best to see them, to get them interviewed. So thank you again for joining us. Thank you to my co-host, Jimmy Repasi. Thank you to my guest. Let me start this over. We hope you enjoyed tonight's interview with Jimmy Repasi, and it was very eye-opening for me and edifying, and I hope you guys learned as much as I did. If you have a suggestion for a guest to have on Season 2, we're happy to take road trips. I love driving, especially a wee bit above the speed limit, so send us a note with your suggestion of who you'd like to see on the show. Famous or not, we want to interview people that are influential and interesting in the car industry who have things to share that would benefit the viewers. Thank you to my guest again, Jimmy Repasi, and for his incredible hospitality and his wealth of knowledge. Thank you to our sponsors, Boxcast, Nuts for Sticks, Switchcars, Celebrity Machines, Stephen Holm Woodworking, and Nathan's Detailing. Our bumper music is provided by Emily and Ivory. You can stream their full album on Spotify or SoundCloud. This episode will be available Friday in audio format wherever you listen to podcasts. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you next Wednesday at 8 p.m., where we'll look forward to answering your automotive questions to help you on the drive of your life.